Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. On the panel with me today are Mr. Doug Marks and Mr. Ron Merritt. Our assessor is Karine Garakani. Our administrative person is Zachary Mohan. My name is Bill Moretsky. I am also on the panel and will be chairing this hearing. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that was mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, and information on how to do so will be included in the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 2, 5 to 7, and 9 on our docket today. Mr. Mohan, please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony.
Yours, Mr. Chair. Madam Assessor, please state your full name.
Karine Garakani.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
My name is Jarrett Story.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our first item on the docket today is item number 2, 585 Jarvis. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value, as well as for revision of the class and liability. Ms. Garakani, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt as well. Is what's going on, or sorry, how do I phrase it properly? We have the classification of liability, or liability taxation classification of property points to begin with, so.
Sure, I can, if I may, Mr. Chair. We already have, there is a class code, there's an exemption applied to a portion of this building. So
yes.
we're not asking that a new exemption be put on, and in fact our adjustment is well in line with the city. So it's not a separate or standalone issue, but we do always appeal it as part of the appeal on value when we have an active exemption. So we don't have anything to add from a standalone perspective on the exemption. So I think Mr. Mohan is suggesting that I would go first based on the request of an application of an exemption, but that exemption is already there. So for our purposes today, we could simply, I could withdraw the class code appeal because while we're still able to talk about it, because it has been applied already, if that makes things easier for you, either way.
Can we accept the withdrawal verbally, Mr. Mohan?
Yes, we can. I'll need Mr. Story to fill out a withdrawal form. I can send it to him directly for this
Sure.
problem. Yeah,
That sounds
Okay.
good. Yep, no
We'll
problem.
proceed forward on that basis then. Class and liability appeal will be withdrawn by the applicant. Okay, Ms. Durakny, you may begin then.
Thank you. File number 24-2230, roll number 14002169000 for the address of 585 Jarvis Avenue. We are defending the assessed value of $1,249,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of one building with 5 premises, with 1 story, an actual and effective year build of 2008, a wall height of 18 feet, leasable area of 8,000 square feet, and a land to plan area of 2.76. I'll turn your attention to page 2 with the subject sale history, showing the 2014 sale of $1,150,000. Maps are provided on page 3. It is located in the Dufferin Industrial Area near Mackenzie Street and Andrew Street. Exterior photos are provided on page 3 and aerial views on page 4 through 5. Rent comparables are provided on page 6. They are all flex warehouses like the subject. We've provided 5 rent comparables with leasing starting in 2018 to 2020, an area range of 1928 to 2,488 square feet, wall height of 10 to 20 feet, an effective year built of 1999 to 2007, and a net rent of $8.05 to $15.25 per square foot. Our income workup is on page 7. There will be 2 streams. So for the first income stream is the institutional taxable school exempt part of it. Includes the 3 premises. It adds up to 4,200 square feet. Has a blended rent of $10.52 per square foot, providing potential rent of $44,164. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 4%, plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $40,453. We've capitalized that at 6.10%, in which generates our capitalized value of $663,164, in which we rounded down to our final value of $663,000. On page 8 is the second stream. The taxable side, there are 2 premises that total 3,800 square feet with a blended rent of $10.27, provide a potential rent of $39,024. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 4%, plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $35,731. We've also capitalized this at 6.10%. In which generates our capitalized value of $585,754, rounded up to our final value of $586,000. We have our capitalization rates on page 10, and our 6.10 is about in the middle of our industrial range. The income and expense questionnaire was provided on page 12 and 13. Checked off the net income type with a rent income of $67,098, total leasable area of 8,000 square feet. That provides a $8.39 rent. We do believe that the assessed value of $1,249,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rockney, have you visited this property?
I have not, no.
Okay, now just to be very, very clear, so the panel is aware, this is, well, this would be 1 block off of Dufferin and McGregor. This would be very much in the north end on Jarvis, facing the CPR rail yard, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and do you think perhaps that locationally this might be a challenging area?
I don't know for certain, but I would believe it being in the different industrial section, it to be still a decent area.
Okay. You've used comparables on Scurfield Boulevard. Is there anything that's comparable, or what is it exactly about? You've got 3 here on Scurfield. What is it about that building on Scurfield that you believe to be comparable to our building on Jarvis?
It was the square footage that I was seeking.
Okay. And that that's a flex building, but it's primarily medical dental, is it not? I know that Unit 4 is a Crown and Bridge lab, right? So that would be a medical dental facility. Is that correct?
Don't know what it is in there, to be honest, but
Okay. And this is all model generated, correct?
it is, yes.
Okay. And did you review the actual income and expense mailer to see what they're receiving, what it's costing them, and then also to get a sense of the nature of what goes on at this property?
I did not know.
Okay. I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt, any questions?
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman, at this point. Thank you.
Okay, you're coming in very quietly, Mr. Merritt.
Okay. How's this?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. I have no questions, Mr. Chairman, at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Marks, any questions?
My questions have been asked and answered. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
So what is the split between the 60T and the 40S in the building? How is that attained? You know, which part is 40S? Which part is 60T?
It's a very good question. I just have the square footage difference. In regards to, let me see if I can. Maybe Mr. Story knows for sure. I'll see if I can find something. They do have Three Guys Greens Incorporated. As well as the Winnipeg Boldness Project. So they're the 2 companies with those square footage. In regards to exactly what part of the building, I'm not sure about that.
Okay. I had one other question. I just have to, yes, on the rent comparables. So basically you just have 3 then, right? 3 other properties as comparables?
Yes.
Because the 59 Scurfield is listed 3 times because of the different lease points. Is that what it is?
Correct. Yeah, and the one McDermott is the best one, with it being in the same market region, I would say. But was trying to grab the comparable with a 20-foot wall height.
So 1090 McDermott is the best one?
I would say
So,
this is the same market region.
right, okay. So you have 805 for that one, and you have somewhere between, you have 1027 for the 40S and 1052 for the 60T. right? The blended rates.
Correct. Yeah.
Did I get that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you. Mr. Story, you may begin your presentation, please.
Thank you, sir. So once again, as we've established, we are at 585 Jarvis Avenue in the north end, and again, we are facing the CPR rail yard. You have photos. You can see exactly where we are. Okay, so this is about half a block south of the Gimli Fish at the corner of McGregor and Dufferin, something of a landmark. So that gives you a sense of exactly where we are. So again, this is the north side of Jarvis. This would be considered Weston Shops, but it's the north end. It was built in 2008. It has mezz space. So there's 8,000 square feet of plant area, mezz space of 1,305 square feet for a gross floor area of 9,305 square feet. Wall heights are 18 feet. The parcel is regular, and it's 22,057 square feet. Now, I had asked the assessor if they had reviewed the rent roll, and so we're talking about exemptions to some degree here today. And this property, while it is considered physically flex industrial, its use at present is it's primarily housing social service organizations, and they're generally all working on poverty alleviation and food security. And will soon be providing overnight safe spaces for, I guess, at-risk youth in the north end. So it is not operating primarily or purely as an industrial building at this stage. It is more like a social service building, and it is so it would be. We've reflected that in the cap rate, quite frankly, as we would typically expect to see a slightly higher cap rate for those office and retail style properties versus the pure industrial. You'd asked about the breakdown. I have it here for you, Mr. Chair, on page 12. So you can see that Community Unites and Winnipeg Boldness, that's units 2 and 3A, and unit 5, 3,720 feet are exempt. Those are the two that qualified for the exemption. We worked on this administratively, I believe, with the city last cycle to ensure that the exemptions were applied appropriately, and I'm satisfied that they are. You'll see that the only industrial operator left in this building is 204 Demo and Salvage, and they rent 1,600 feet. That's unit 1. Harvest today is another social service agency that we'll look at, and if they satisfy the criteria, we will request that they be exempt as well. But for our purposes today, we've used the actual rents in place. The assessor was using 805 per foot, I believe, and we've used the actuals, which are slightly higher, as you can see. Vacancy, I don't believe to be in dispute at 4%, though I do caution that as this useful, the purpose of this property changes, we might expect to see a higher vacancy and certainly a higher shortfall, as we're no longer simply dealing with flex industrial, but something quite different. All that to say, Mr. Chair, that we've applied a cap rate of 6.75. I think that, and that's to both income streams, of course, I think that adequately captures the locational challenge. I cannot understate that Jarvis is indeed a difficult, if you're in the Dufferin and Jarvis area, those are difficult places to do business, to be certain, without putting too fine a point on it. And that cap rate of 6.75 certainly reflects the present use, and it may be low. We might be looking at something like 7%, given the current use of the property, but I'm happy with the overall value resulting from a 6.75 cap rate on both income streams. So with that being said, Mr. Chair, our request today is $981,000, and that's apportioned by applying class code 60. So the non-exempt portion is $519,000 as we calculate, and $462,000 would be allocated to the class code 40. That's the exempt space. The balance of the brief is simply the income and expense workup, as well as some of the city's parameters that they've applied. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Durochany, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
Just a few, thank you. Mr. Story, were you able to inspect the property yourself?
No, I wasn't able to inspect it myself, but again, in the last cycle, one of the agents who was working through the administrative process, I believe he went through the entire building. So, but it has changed a little bit. There's been changeover on the tenancy. As I mentioned, they are turning one of those units into an overnight safe space. So I think we'll do a fresh inspection for the next cycle and get some photos of what the interior looks like, because I suspect it is going to be quite different than a typical industrial building at that time, and certainly currently.
That's great. No, okay, that's perfect. And that was my question regarding the tenants, because we do still have the Three Guys Greens incorporated in our system, so it'd be great to have that all updated. And yes, and just following up to it being, is it still portioned of the social service, or is it now taking over the whole building? Then we would definitely want to follow up on that as well. So I thank you for that. That is all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
Yes, just one, based on, excuse me, the rents you used are actuals of this particular property?
Yes, indeed, sir. Those are the contract rents. So anybody purchasing this property would be purchasing those rents. Those are the real rents. Those are not theoretical or comparables. Those are actual rents in places of the reference.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Okay, regarding the actual information, is that on page 25?
Yes, page 25 is the income and expense mailer that was submitted. Right. Yeah, that's where it starts. And then you can see on page 26, that's the rent roll.
That's the rent roll?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. A little difficulty reading it here on my screen, but it appears that the net operating income is 62,369 reported for 2022. Correct?
Sorry. The net operating income that they have here is, yes, that's right. 62,369. Yes, that's right.
39. So you're at 66,180.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're higher.
A little bit higher. Okay.
Yes.
Now, this area, this is an industrial area, kind of in the north end, as you said. There is a lot of industries in this area. Would you agree with that?
Yes, there are. Yeah, we do a number of them down Jarvis, and it is to be quite blunt, Mr. Chair, there's a fair bit of, call it nuisance behavior. So there is required additional security, typically is required, that sort of thing. So it's certainly not comparable to Scurfield, but yes, you're quite right. There are a number of firms down this stretch from up into McPhillips or so, let's say. But yes, there are indeed, but it's not typically one of the more desirable industrial parks in the city, to be certain.
I think you were making the argument that because of the challenges in this area, as you had just outlined, that justified a higher cap rate. Would that be correct?
Yes,
characterization?
Yes.
What your argument?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So effectively, our position is that anybody who is purchasing this property, if we do believe that it is higher risk, then they would require a higher return. So that's the basis for that adjustment. So if we can agree that the neighborhood is more challenging or riskier, then anyone purchasing the property would likely require a greater rate of return. So that's part of the argument. The other part of the argument for the adjustment to the capitalization rate is that this is no longer simply a purely industrial flex warehouse. This has now become a social service asset. So if we're looking to capitalization rates in the, call it the office or the retail side, which is where this would more rightly fall in terms of present use, you'd be looking at a cap rate probably starting at 7 for good quality. So I think that 6.75 makes a lot of sense in this context.
Okay, you mentioned it's Scurfield. So if you were to take this building and lot and park it in Scurfield, what kind of cap rate do you think would be justified then?
Yeah, I think you'd be looking at, well, it would depend on the quality of tenancy. There'd be a number of factors to consider, but you'd be looking at somewhere close to I would say just very broadly, somewhere between 6 and 6.25, something like that. So if it's a 50 basis point adjustment, that holds as well. So I think that's an interesting, I haven't thought about that, but I think probably somewhere in the 6 to 6.25 if it were moved based on its age. It's newer, so.
Yes. Okay, just give me a moment here.
Sure.
Okay. I have no further questions. Anything in summation, Ms. Durochany?
I do not, thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Story?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll leave it there.
Bear with me for a moment here, please, people. That will conclude item number 2, 585 Jarvis. We'll then move to item number 5, 999 Fife. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Ms. Durochany, you may begin your presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-3656, roll number 14041561100 for the address of 9995 Street. We're defending the assessed value of $1,267,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of one building with one premise and a story. Actual year built and effective, actually year built of 1973 with an effective year built of 1978. Wall height of 16 feet, leasable area of 7,051 square feet, and a land to plan area of 2.07. Maps are provided on page 3. It is near Boyd Avenue and Redwood Avenue. Exterior photos on page 4 and aerial photos page 4 through 6. Our rent comparables are provided on page 7. And they are all storage warehouses like the subject. We've provided 7 rent comparables with leasing starting in 2020 to 2021. An area range of 5,500 to 8,816 square feet. Wall height of 12 to 21 feet. An effective year build of 1972 to 1980. And a net rent of $6.75 to $13.50 per square foot. Our income workup is on page 8. The one premise has 7,051 square feet with a rent of $9.75 per square foot, providing potential rent of $68,747. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 3.5%, plus expenses at 3%, with a shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $63,364. We've capitalized that at 5%, in which generates our capitalized value of $1,267,280, rounded down to our final value of $1,267,000. Page 10 has our capitalization rates. And our 5% cap is less than our 20th percentile, but not by much. The income and expense questionnaire is provided on page 12 and 13 with a gross income type with a rent income of $68,400 with the total leasable area of 7,200 square feet. That gives a $9.50 rent. But down below at the end of that of page 12 shows a leasable area of 7,051 square feet. So if that's the case, it would provide a $9.70 rent. We do believe that the assessed value of $1,267,000 to be fair and equitable and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Mr. Story, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Yes, sir, I do. Mr. Rockney, this assessment is all modeled, is that correct? Okay. And that actual year of 1973 and effective year of 1978, can you tell me why the department has made an adjustment of 5 years to this property?
is a very good question. Typically, if there's any permits regarding any renovations, that would be the reason. Let me just see if something comes up here. Years there was a sale verification.
So when the property sells, the city adjusts the effective year? Is that how that works?
No, there'd be some type of
Okay.
reevaluation of the
Okay.
property.
And because it is all modeled, the parameters are derived from 1978 as opposed to 1973, correct?
Correct.
And so what impact would that have on the value?
I mean, the 5-year difference isn't a huge difference. And it is one of many features with it in mind. Right along with the wall height that isn't that high to begin with.
Right. Okay, so the wall height, those 16 feet, 16-foot wall heights, typically that would give us 14 feet clear. Is that fair comment?
Comment.
Yeah, and that would be very, very low by today's standards, would it not?
Lower than the average, yeah.
Right. And that land to plan of just a touch over 2 to 1, that would also be considered very, very low, correct?
It's on the lower side of things, yes.
Okay. And are you aware that based on the previous submissions to the city, that this owner was actually renting a parcel adjacent to their building from Manitoba Hydro and the city of Winnipeg because they didn't have enough of their own parking? Did you see that in the file when reviewing for this hearing?
There is a bit of information regarding renting out of the building, but nothing about the parking aspect.
Okay. Okay. I guess the reason that I'm asking is because you've mentioned that 5% cap rate is below your 20th percentile, but what is it specifically about this building that is making the model believe that it is superior to a vast majority of the industrial stock in Winnipeg? This, from my perspective, this looks like an old garage on the edge of the Inkster Industrial Park. So why is it being applied only a 5% cap rate?
I don't know for certain, but it could be that it's been rented out. There's no risk there.
But it is owner occupied, correct?
Actually, I'm not aware of.
Okay. In terms of your rent comps, Mr. Rockney, many of these are very short leases, 5 years and less, or less than 5 years, I would say. Is that correct?
There's one with 7 years, 5 and 10.
Okay. And these are all in different market regions, correct?
No, there's a few in the same market region. This is market region 1. There's the Hecla and Oak Point, I believe.
Okay, so I'll rephrase that. None of these comps are in the Inkster Industrial Park, correct?
I'm not aware, but if you look that up.
Well, you can just see by the street names. And then just very quickly, now you selected these yourself, presumably?
Yes.
Okay, and did you select them? I think that the trend here is that these are older properties related to vehicle service. Is that why these are being used as a comparable for Allquip?
Take a quick peek. To be honest, it's not in regards to what's being occupied, but more or less the same features.
Okay. And then I guess just lastly, one of these stuck out to me, that input on Daly Street, that is a tap room and a brewery. That's Low Life Barrel House. That's off of Pembina. So are you aware of that? That's not a current industrial use.
It is a storage warehouse, so that's why that one came up.
It's called
That's
Low
like
Life
all-
Barrel House. It's a craft brewery, but okay. That's fine, but that is all modeled. The cap rate is 5. Now, I guess just to go back to that cap rate issue, the brokers are certainly not suggesting anything below a 6% for industrial Bs, correct? And that's based on what you've submitted here today. The brokers are saying 6 to 7, 6.5 to 7.5, and 6 to 6.75, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I suppose I've asked already, but is there any indication? Do you have sales to support such a low cap rate on this property, or I'm just struggling with how a 5% was applied to this property? It's just simply modeled?
Modeled, yeah,
Okay.
that's what it got
Yeah.
chosen to, but
And-
it indicated while the owner occupied, the income and expense questionnaire didn't indicate as that. Is that?
Oh, I
Concern?
looked at the 2021 and they put a big note on it saying that they were common ownership, and I believe they did it under the section that said end date on the lease. So I can certainly ask them to make sure that's checked off as we go forward so that it's not missed cycle over cycle. Okay, I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Marks, any questions for the assessor?
So, thank you. My questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So on the income and expense mailer on page 12, somebody, Mr. Story had mentioned owner occupied, and I think you agreed to him, but yet there is a income in 2022 of $68,400. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Well, to be honest, we weren't notified it being owner occupied. So that's kind of come to a shock to me because indeed it's not indicated as such on page 12. So we took this as the gross income type that they indicated. As well as
And also, so if they are getting a rent income on 2022 reported, actually for the end of February 23. So for the year of 68,400 rent income, yet their expenses. Oh, wait a minute, I see there's interest there. Anyways, even if you factor that interest of 10,365, their net operating income is still around 22,000. You have, and your workup 63,000. What would be the reason for that discrepancy?
with our work.
What do you think would be the reason for that discrepancy? Do you want me to repeat the question a little?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the net operating shown right now for on the income and expense report is, I believe, 11,540. Did I read that correctly? It's hard to read for me as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I see above there's interest of, is it 30,000 there or is it 10,000?
30,365.
Is that 30,000 then? Is that what it is?
It looks at, 30,365.
Then I have to, so that again is, that'd be about 41,000 of net operating income then, according to their report.
About that, yeah.
Okay, so if you compare that to what you have in the model, which is 63,000, that's a difference of about 23,000. So, any ideas of what could explain that discrepancy?
I mean, one thing looks like to be the square footage. That's a little bit of a discrepancy, them inputting the 7,200. Where we have 7,051. But as well, our income workup is model driven.
Okay, so you don't see anything on here that would explain that difference? Or you? or can you explain what you think it would be? It should be making what the model or close to what the model projects if it was managed properly, correctly? Correct? Is that correct characterization?
Yeah, correct.
So why is it 20,000 difference? 23,000.
Um. I don't know. I mean, definitely there could be something missing with their income and expense questionnaire. Usually there's another part of it. Oh, I guess the below. Um,
Or maybe the whole building isn't rented out. Is that possible?
that could be, yeah, maybe it's partially owner occupied.
Okay. Anyways, you don't have any information on that. Fair enough.
I think for certain, no, sorry.
Okay. I have no further questions then. Mr. Story, you may begin your presentation, please.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you very much. Just while it's top of mind, Mr. Chair, I want to just remind the panel this property is indeed fully owner occupied. That rent that's been recorded would be considered a book rent. So it's not a real rent. It's simply their something they've put down. But it is interesting because it does equate to $9.50 a foot gross. So if we believe the shortfall to be $4 a foot, as the city does, we wouldn't use the full shortfall on vacant space. You would expect a net rent then, based on what they've submitted, somewhere between $6.50 and $7.50, and I've used $7.50. Okay, so I just want to point that out. So it is fully owner occupied. This is the former Sid's Car Care. There were two buildings. They were split apart and sold. It's currently being used by Allquip, and they do hoses and pneumatic work for machinery. Okay, so once again, owner occupied. You can see, Mr. Chair, on my page 7, there's a small it's a small little sliver of land that the owner had to rent from Manitoba Hydro and the city of Winnipeg in order to service their parking. You can see the way that that's all sort of cut up on page 7. It is a bit odd, but I've not made an adjustment for that. I just do want to point that out. Typically, we would expect in the Inkster Industrial Park a land to building somewhere in the range of ideally 4-to-1. 3-to-1 would be more typical, as some of those buildings since the 1970s have been expanded upon, but 2-to-1 is simply exceptionally low. The wall heights are very low as well, and the reason we bring that up, Mr. Chair, is that it simply limits the potential pool of end users to this property. So it has some specific challenges. It suits the needs of the current owner occupier. But from a market perspective, we have to be reasonable, and we think that cap rate of only 5% is just extremely and aggressively low. Page 14, I've mentioned that I've used $7.50. You can see I've provided you with 14 rental comps, Church, Plymouth, Muir, and Paramount. These are all in the Inkster Industrial Park. Those rents have an average of $6.93 and a median of $7. Once again, I've used $7.50. It is a smaller space, so we are conscious of economies of scale, of course. The shortfall, vacancy, and non-recoverable expense allowances are not in dispute, so that leaves us with the cap rate. We've applied a cap rate of 6.5%. That's exactly in line with what the brokers are telling us. That's what our own study is indicating. This would be on the low end of what we'll call Class B. There might be an argument to be made that it's non-investment grade. However, we've been reasonably optimistic with it. It is a smaller space. There is still a pool for end users for this type of property, but 5% is we're just not seeing. We don't see any sales indicating something like that. And to be fair, the brokers are not suggesting that either. So 6.5% is what we've used. Oh, I'm sorry. I changed it in my final workup to 6%. Okay, that's a fair bit. That's low, but I am conscious of the sale as well. So we were apologies for that. We were going in with 6.5. We adjusted before submission to 6. So, okay, we're using 6%. That is very low. Again, that is accounting for the size. I think that's very, very fair, and it does consider that sale. So that amended value on page 21 works out to 808,559, which we then, of course, round to $809,000. I will point out, Mr. Chair, on page 23, I couldn't help but notice, but the cycle over cycle increase on this property is 43%. That would be considered exceptionally high. That's very aggressive. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that. I think the model, quite frankly, has missed the mark on this property by a fair margin. I've included the previous income and expense mailer. Now, the assessor has mentioned that the owner has not told them that it's owner occupied. They have indeed. You can see on the 2021, or the mailer that was submitted in May of 2021, this is on my page 29, that it is indeed fully owner occupied. They've recorded an income type as gross, and then that book rent is applied. And then you can see just down that middle column where it says other, it shows that they were renting that space, that Manitoba Hydro space. So that was an added cost that we didn't account for, but it has been that little sliver has now been purchased, is my understanding. So there's no requirement required there, no adjustment required. And then on page 31, Mr. Chair, you can see that they applied a sticky note for Allquip saying no end date as owner of Allquip, and the numbered company. Right, they're indicating that there's common ownership between those two companies. So that is indeed an internal or a book rent. So I think I will. Oh, and then the Manitoba Hydro rent charge. That snippet is included there to further support what we had mentioned, though it is less of an issue. It's just there just to get a full sense of this property. So ultimately, Mr. Chair, we feel very comfortable at a value of $809,000. We've been very optimistic with that cap rate of only 6%, and our rents at $7.50 are exactly what we expect to see for a property such as this in this area. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Durakany, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
I do not, thank you.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
Mr. Story, you originally had a cap rate of 6.5%,
Yes, indeed.
and you adjusted it down to 6.
We did.
And,
Yes, we did, sir. I think that if I recall correctly, we were looking at the sale. Now, I recall from speaking to the owners when they came on board with us that sale was, they needed a space, so that sale price may be high, but I want to be very fair, and I don't want to come in with something that is, excuse me, far out of line from how the property performed. So you can imagine that for a number of users who would otherwise be renting, the ability to purchase this property for, 700 or whatever it was, 770, that would be attractive. So there may be more potential purchasers for a property such as this. It is functional space. It's in a good location. It does have those challenges that I mentioned regarding wall height and regarding site coverage and land to building. However, with consideration of the sale, I think that 6% fits. I think those rents are good. I think that I'm trying to make it all make sense together. So 6 might be low, but 5 is not 5 is not in the conversation. It would be between 6 and 6.5 from my perspective, and I think it would be very fair by applying 6% on a site-specific review.
Thank you. Just one other question, Mr. Story. You talked about the sale. Did you look at converting, what cap rate is, derived from, the sale price?
Oh, good question. No, so it's an older sale. We didn't look at it, I don't believe, when it occurred. It might have been, we could have imputed a cap rate on it, I'm sure. The issue was it would have been selling from one owner occupier to another, from what I believe. I believe that, and to further complicate things, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Merritt, there were 2 buildings there that were split apart. So it's a good question. I didn't dig into the sale. It would be interesting to see the machinations of splitting those buildings apart and selling them off individually and seeing what that resulting cap rate might be. But that's a long answer to say, no, I wasn't able to investigate that sale when it happened. But I do know that the folks who purchased this part of the building required a building fairly quickly. So they were motivated to get active in that space.
All right, I thank you, Mr. Story. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
Yes, the Manitoba Hydro property, is that a long-term lease or is that year to year?
That was, I believe that was year to year, and it appears that they purchased that little sliver in either 19 or 20. We see that sometimes. I think it's probably not. I'm speculating, but I would imagine that administratively, it's not a good use of the government's time to rent out a tiny sliver of land for a few $1,000s or whatever. So it was purchased by these owners. Typically, we would make an adjustment to the main holding. We would subtract that value from the main holding, but we haven't in this case. So it was on, I think it was an annual lease. So it wasn't month to month or anything like that. I think it was an annual
Well,
lease.
right now that is owned by.
It's owned by
property
Alcoa
owner.
now. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that isn't shown yet in the workups.
No, it's not. And it was, I looked at it again, and the assessment is fairly nominal. It's only a few $1,000s. So,
Right.
so it's okay. I think that I'm very careful, Mr. Marks, not to double count. So I don't want to say, we've applied a cap rate that recognizes this low land to building, but then we're also subtracting the ancillary parcel. It all has to sort of make sense. So no adjustment yet, but we may review it in the future to see how it all works. Yeah.
So with that land being part of the property now, the land, plan to land is going to be higher then?
Well, that's a good question. No, it's not currently, because the rolls are separately assessed and separately taxed. So, I mean, it would be fine, I think, from the owner. I haven't asked them about it, but I think it would be fine if those rolls were merged. It would add a nominal benefit, I would say, in terms of the land to building, but currently they're separately assessed and separately taxed. So the owner pays tax on both parcels. So at this stage, I wouldn't say that the land to plan is positively affected until such time as those rolls are merged and then assessed and taxed as a single economic unit as opposed to two.
Would it make sense at that point then to put that onto one title?
I think, well, the title, well, I'm not sure. That would be fairly costly. I don't know if the benefit would justify the cost of merging the title, but merging the roles is a far different process. That's something that can be done administratively by the city of Winnipeg. And typically we do see that when you have adjacent roles with common ownership, the city will sometimes just merge those roles. They don't require permission from the owner to do such. So I think it would make sense. I'll have to speak to the owner if they have any issues for or against, but I think it would make things easier if everything was on one roll. But I suppose we'll see if the city makes that adjustment.
Thank you, Mr. Story. No further questions.
Thank you.
Okay, I have no further questions. Anything in summation, Ms. Durochany?
I do not, thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Story?
Yes, Mr. I'd just like to point out once again that the crux of our issue is that cap rate is extraordinarily low, and we would suggest that a cap rate of 6% may be low, but 5% is not appropriate for this property. So we would respectfully submit that that cap rate be adjusted for the purpose of our exercise today. Thank you.
Thank you. That then will conclude item number 5, 9995. We will then move forward to item number 6, 1430 Church. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. And a preliminary issue, I believe there is a non-co-op requested, Mr. Rockney?
Yes.
Okay, what I'm going to have you do then is read the property in and then proceed to your non-co-op case, please. And we will decide on that.
Great, thank you, Mr.
Then
Chairman.
we'll go with the rest of your presentation.
File number 24-1812, roll number 14063950200 for the address of 1430 Church Avenue. We are defending the assessed value of $1,451,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. We are seeking non-compliance On our page 3 is the tracking number at the top, that matches the page 4. That we were able to get a signature. There are letters that were mailed out. The first one, page 5 is April 13, 2023. This is the blank form that was mailed out. And on page 10 is the second one that was mailed out, dated June 9th, 2023, with that tracking number at the top. And it goes until page 14 for that second letter. Page 15 through 20 is the completed income and expense questionnaire that was received to us July 17, 2023. But although received late, we do still wish to seek non-compliance.
Okay. Any questions, Mr. Story, on that matter?
Yeah, yes, indeed, I do. Mr. Rockney, sorry, you're suggesting that it was, just to be very clear, that it was late and not delinquent, correct? Okay, and they did submit an income and expense mailer, and I see it online. I have it in my brief, and it's certainly on your site. So why is this blank mailer included here? Is this simply what was sent out? This is not what was received by the owner, correct?
Correct. We just provided the blank copies that was mailed out.
Okay, and on page 15, why did you include something for 1330 Mountain? See on page 15, that's an income and expense mailer related to a wholly different property, correct?
Error, and I believe it's because, I don't want to say for certain, but I think it was mailed for both properties. But I'm not certain about.
It's not the same owner. Okay, and then I guess my other question is, from my records, now tell me if this is what you have as well, because I'm looking at it on the city website. It's showing me that the mailed request for 1430 Church was made 7/17/23, and that you had received a submission on 7/20/2023. So within 3 days of receiving that form, they mailed it back to you. So I'm a little confused as to why you're pursuing the non-compliance. To be fair, it appears from my perspective that they, in fact, were completely compliant. They responded to your request in 3 days. So is that not what you have on record?
They signed it. July 14, 2023.
If you look at my evidence, Mr. Rockney, page 37, you can see that their controller signed off on it on 7/17. That would have been the day that they received it. And your records online say that you recorded receiving it on 7/20, 3 days later. So is that not what you have on your system?
We did receive it on July 17th, I believe. Let me just quickly double check. As far as I'm aware, we do still seek non-compliance, even when we receive it late.
But if it were responded to within 3 days of receipt, then how could it be late? That seems like a very tight timeline. I think it's a very diligent turnaround, is it not?
I think it's because they still didn't like inquire on the extension aspect of it.
Okay, so that's my next question. So had they written requesting an extension, that extension would have been granted and we wouldn't be having the conversation. Is that a fair comment? Okay, I think I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair. I think I understand now.
Okay, Mr. Merritt, any questions on this matter?
I
For
think
the assessor?
I think we will have our conversation in private. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Marks, any questions you want to ask?
I would agree with what's the last statement.
Okay. And I have no questions at this point for the assessor. Is there anything you want to say, Mr. Story, on this matter?
Yes,
on your own
indeed,
behalf?
sir. Absolutely, yes. So I've alluded to a great deal of, as you can imagine. It's our perspective that they are not non-compliant. If you look at page, in my evidence, starting on page 36, you can see that they did indeed submit this. I can warrant to you that on the city's my properties page, which is where they record all of the receipts and submissions, that it is showing. Sorry, I want to get the dates exactly right. That mail received date was 7/17, its submitted date was 7/20. So I think it would be unreasonable in this context to apply the penalty for something that was submitted 3 days after receiving it. And if it's simply a matter of not requesting an extension, I don't think that's, I think that they are compliant. I do not think that there's any reason to apply the penalty in this context. So I will leave it there. I think I've made my point, and all the documentation is in the back end of my brief for your review, sir.
Okay, I'm going to have to reverse here a little bit. I just have one more question for the assessor. When you request these income and expense mailers and the owner does not comply, is there a difference if the owner does not comply at all, so you have no information for that cycle, or if they do comply but it's late? What is the difference there?
A very good question. I am under the impression that they both would receive the penalty. Of course, we do ask to receive it rather than not at all. But because they didn't request an extension, that they would still receive a penalty.
So there's no real benefit to the applicant for providing it late as opposed to not at all then? Is that correct? Or does it make any difference to their penalty?
Not that I'm aware of. There would be.
Okay. Okay, we are going to go into deliberation recess on the non-co-op matter then, Mr. Mohan. Okay, we are back in order. The panel has deliberated on the non-co-op request, and we have decided to not grant it. Therefore, Ms. Durochny, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to the property description, it consists of 2 buildings with 1 premise and 1 story. It has an actual year built of 1962 to 1987, with an effective year built of 1973. The wall height is 14 to 20 feet, leasable area of 12,080 square feet, with the land to plan area of 2.48. I will bring your attention to page 21 has some maps. It is located in the Inkster Industrial Park near Milner Street and Bunting Street. Exterior photos on page 21 through 22. Aerial views on page 23 and 24. Our rent comparables are on page 25. They are all storage warehouses like our subject. We've provided 8 rent comparables with leasing starting in 2018 to 2022, an area range of 8,804 to 15,600 square feet, wall height of 12 to 21 feet, an effective year build of 1963 to 1980, and a net rent of $6 to $9.75 per square foot. Our income workup is on page 26. The one premise has 12,080 square feet with a rent of $6.82 per square foot, provide a potential rent of 82,386. We reduced that by a vacancy loss of 3.5% plus expenses at 3% with a shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of 75,426. We've capitalized that at 5.2%, and which generates our capitalized value of 1,450,500, rounded up to our final total $1,451,000. Our capitalization rates is on page 28 with a 5.2%, just a bit lower than our 20th percentile. The income and expense questionnaire that was provided, I did take a peek, and that was a human error on my part. I apologize. I did quickly look at the correct one that we did receive. They did provide a gross of $78,233.19. They indicated a square footage of 12,078. Giving a $6.48 rent. We do believe that the assessed value of $1,451,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
I do, Mr. Chair, yes. Mr. Rockney, once again, this assessment, is this all derived from the model with no adjustments by city staff? It's simply a work of the model. Okay. Have you visited the property? I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Mr. Rockney.
I have not, no.
Oh, there you are. Thanks. Okay. To your knowledge, has anyone from the city inspected this property in recent years?
Take a quick peek. There was an inspection in 2019 by one of my coworkers.
Okay. Okay. And we're not disputing rent. Our rents are a little bit higher than yours today, so I'll just pass over that. Again, okay, can we agree on review of this property that it is indeed fairly somewhat severely pinned in by that rail line?
Not visited the location myself, but in viewing the map, I actually don't know for certain. Is there a railway nearby?
Yeah, if you look at
Yeah.
page 24, the property boundary follows the curvature of the rail line. It's on your
Okay, I see
page
that.
24.
Thank you.
Okay, and
Yeah.
seeing that, can we also agree that this is this could only be described as an irregular parcel of land, so it would not be a typical square rectangle, let's say? Yeah. Okay. And again, that cap rate is model derived, and just to be fair, there are no sales presented by the city to support such a low cap rate. Is that fair?
We do not do that, no.
Okay, and can we agree as well that the evidence that you've supplied for the cap rates, it's your internal workup without any support, and then the brokers' tables. Would you agree with me that the brokers would suggest, once again, that the starting point for industrial B would be 6 to 6.5? Is that a fair comment? Okay. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman, at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
No questions for me, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I have no questions. Mr. Story, you may begin your presentation, please.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. So here we are at 1430 Church. Once again, we're in the Inkster Industrial Park. This is going to be an appeal that's basically just about the cap rate at this stage. Our vacancy and allowances for shortfall and expenses are not in dispute, and our rent is indeed just a touch higher than the model. We're using $7 where they're using $6.82. So this is simply a question of applying an appropriate industrial cap rate for this property. I inspected the property on January 17th of 2025. So I guess just over 2 weeks ago, right before evidence went in. Spoke with the owners. One of the issues that they have, or there are two issues that are immediately apparent. This property is, for most users, over officed. So you can see on page 6, if you look at the percentage of that front building, and that's a building with 14-foot ceiling heights, and that's the office for Bison Janitorial. It's an owner-occupied property. Typically, we'd expect to see an office component of maybe 10 to 20%, very broadly. This is a great deal more than that, as you can appreciate. Further, that proximity to the rail line would impede them from ever expanding this site, and they do have some issues that they report with parking and having vehicles on site. So that is something of a frustration. And of course, when we look at this property from a market view, that proximity to the rail line would not be considered a positive, and that irregular parcel would not be considered a positive. And again, we do have that low land to building. So we've taken all that into account with the application of an appropriate cap rate. In this case, we've used 6.5%. Again, we have my rental comps. I'm just flipping through here. And ultimately, Mr. Chair, with an NOI of 77,461, capitalized at 6.5%, that leads us to an indicated market value of $1,191,711, which we then, of course, round to $1,192,000. With that, I'm sorry, there's a typo. There's a secondary line in there. Please disregard that. It is indeed the $1,192,000. Something else got copied over. Okay, so I've included the income and expense mailers. I also have the interior site inspection. You can see the office space has been renoed for Bison Janitorial. Office space is in nice shape, and then the warehouse is what you'd expect. So ultimately, we're using a baseline cap rate of 6.5%. That's exactly what we would expect to see for an industrial property of this vintage, with some of these concerns, such as the amount of office, the low land to building, and of course that parking challenge. Oh, I did include sort of interesting on page 33. We don't typically consider nuisance behavior or crime or vandalism in this area. That's more, we talked about that a little bit on Jarvis, but the owners did mention that there's been a bit of an uptick lately. So I've included the barred windows that they've just installed. So they do have something of a concern there. I'm not making any adjustment, but I thought it's worth mentioning. And it certainly would defy that 5.2 modeled cap, which is, again, far too low from our perspective. So with that said, Mr. Chair, we do respectfully submit that the value not exceed $1,192,000 based on our submission. And again, this is simply based on slightly higher NOI and a cap rate that is more appropriate at 6.5%. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Durakny, any questions on the applicant's presentation?
I do, yes, thank you. Just one, I believe. Mr. Story, you had mentioned that you had inspected the property.
Yeah, so it was there on January 17th.
No, that's great. I had a follow-up about, were you able to review on the recent sale by any chance?
Yeah, so there's a sale. Sorry, it's about 1.1, something like that. Let me just, yeah, and that's pretty much in line with what we're suggesting. So we're not, I think we're well in line with the market. I mean, we could be a little bit higher, we could be a little bit lower, but we're certainly in the range. I think the modeled assessment is too high. But no, I think that our value is aligned to the sale price. I think that makes sense.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
No questions for me, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
Just a quick one, Mr. Story, on the previous property you used on Fife, you used a 6% cap rate?
Yes, indeed.
And this one here is coming in at 6.5.
Yes, indeed. I thought you might ask that. So these two properties are slightly different. They're different animals, to be certain. So, the old car care center, there's an argument to be made that they are slightly lower risk, that there may be more end users requiring that style of functional space. This property has some very, very unique issues. Again, that high degree of office, that is not desirable for many industrial users, and it's not curable, sir. We have a 14-foot height, so even if you did want to convert some of this building to some other industrial use, I think you're effectively stuck with that high propensity of office. So that's an issue. The very irregular parcel is an issue. The lack of parking that they mentioned on that was one of the things they wanted me to really to mention, that there is an issue with parking and moving vehicles around on this site. And that does support a real world example of land to building. And we often come and say, well, the land to building is too low and it causes issues. And this is a real good case study of how that materializes in the real world. So I appreciate that they're similar vintage. They're pretty much right down the street. They're almost very close, but they are different. They would service different sectors of the market. So I think we're in range at 6.5. To be quite frank, I'm a bit low on that cap rate on Fife, but I want the value to all make sense. We're also using a rent that is slightly different. So on balance, the value of $1,192,000 I think makes a lot of sense. So appreciate the question. It's a good one.
Okay, I thank you, Mr. Story. I have no further questions, Chairman.
Okay, and I have no further questions. Anything in summation, Ms. Durochny?
I do not, thank you.
Anything in summation, Mr. Story?
Yes, sir. Just very quickly, we're just to reiterate, we're not seeing cap rates that are this low for this style of property, or really for any industrial property in the city of Winnipeg at the reference date. So we are aligned to the brokers at a minimum, suggesting that these properties ought to be applied no less than, somewhere in the range of 6 to 6.5. And I think on the site-specific review of this property, 6.5 makes good sense. So I will leave that with you, and I thank you.
Okay, thank you. That will conclude this item number 6, 1430 Church. And we will then go for a recess break at this point, for 11 minutes. Please return 10:30.
Keep going. 10:35?
10:35, sorry, 10:35. Okay, we are back in order, and we are now going to proceed to item number 7 on the docket, which is 1330 Mountain. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. Ms. Durochny, you may begin your presentation, please.
Mr. Chair, file number 24-1877, roll number 1404156750 for the address of 1330 Mountain Avenue. We are defending the assessed value of $2,226,000 for the 2025 roll year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. It consists of 2 buildings with 1 premise and 1 story, an actual year built of 1987 to 1991. We do have it as an effective year built of 1987. A leasable area of 15,000 square feet with a land to plan area of 4.47. Maps are provided on page 3. It is located in the Inkster Industrial Park. It is near Mountain Avenue. It is on Mountain Avenue, rather, sorry. It is near Bentel Street and Fife Street. There are exterior photos on page 4 and 5, aerial views, page 5 and 6. We provided 8 rent comparables. All are storage warehouses like the subject on page 7. Leasing starting in 2016 to 2021, an area range of 10,047 to 16,915 square feet, wall height of 14 to 26 feet, an effective year built of 1977 to 1986, and a net rent of $6.25 to $13.63 per square foot. Our income workup is provided on page 8. The one premise of 15,000 square feet has a rent of $7.88 per square foot, provided potential rent of 118,200. We've reduced that by a vacancy loss of 3.5% plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of 108,541. We've capitalized that at 4.9%, in which generates our capitalized value of 2,215,122, with an additional building value of 11,000, thus providing our final total value of $2,226,000. Our capitalization rates are provided on page 10, in which our 4.9% is lower than our 20th percentile. Our income and expense questionnaire is provided on page 12 through 16. This one looks familiar. With our rent revenue on page 15 of 127,500. On page 16, it indicates 10,625 monthly rent, as well as the annual being 127,500. With the 15,000 square feet, this would give us an $8.50 rent. Based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $2,226,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Mr. Starr, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Yes, just very quickly, Mr. Chair. This is just about the cap rate at this stage. Mr. Rockney, this is a fully modeled workup. Is that fair?
Yes.
And can you give us some indication as to why the model is applying a cap rate of only 4.9%, which is out of line with your own evidence, but is certainly well out of line with the broker's evidence that you've submitted. So what is it about this building that is generating this very, very low cap rate?
Good question. It is model driven. I would predict that it would be with the high land to plan area. The wall height being also a very good wall height, and the effective year built is decent of an age. And possibly the area as well. Being in the Inkster Industrial Park area, that would be.
Okay, but we can agree at a minimum that the broker's evidence that you've submitted here would indicate no less than 6%, correct? And yeah, and when you looked at the rent roll and the rent charge, can you agree with me that the rental income is predicated on leasing of the main holding, that the main building, as well as that 3,600 square foot outbuilding in the back? Is that your understanding?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes. So if you look at this property, there's a main building. This is where they sell and service new and used forklifts and racking for industrial buildings. And based on their operation, if you look on your page 6, there's an outbuilding at the back of the property. And you can see it's open faced. It's sort of a shed, for lack of a better term. The rent that's being charged includes the use of the main holding, the main building, as well as that shed, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, I think those are my only questions, Mr. Chair. I'm just concerned with the cap rate at this stage.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
No, my question's been asked and answered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
None, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, coming in a bit quiet there again, Mr. Merritt.
Oh, sorry. Okay, none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I don't have any further questions. Mr. Story, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so once again, we are at 1330 Mountain. Of course, we're in the Inkster Industrial Park. This is the south side of the mountain between Fife and Bentall. It's an industrial warehouse constructed in 87, 15,000 square foot building. The wall heights are good at 24 feet. And then we have that second outbuilding, which is 3,600 square feet, also with 24-foot wall heights, but it is sort of a, call it more of a utility kind of shelter type building. So we have a regular shape. The land to plan is 4.4 to 1, which is not extraordinarily high. That would be considered good, so no adjustments required there. But again, we have what I'll call a Class B building. The rent's in place. You can see the tenant is Ross Equipment. That rent is fresh as of July 1, 2020, so certainly relevant to our reference date. And it's $850 a foot. And once again, that does include the 15,000 square feet of the main holding, as well as use of the outbuilding. So there's no need to adjust for that. I don't know if this is the one where the city has applied a depreciated cost, but we've captured the use of the entire property in the rental rate, and that is how the market is behaving. That's how they put it to market, and that is how it has been contracted. Once again, cap rate of 6.5% in this instance. So you'll see a theme developing here for these types of properties. We're generally somewhere between 6 and 6.5% based on site-specific review. For this one, we're using 6.5. Rent is a touch high for this building, but again, it does include that use of the secondary building, so it all does hang together. With a cap rate of 6.5%, Mr. Chair, we come to an indicated market value of $1,803,790, which we then round to $1,804,000. The balance of the brief is, you can see there's a sales price in 2002 of only $625,000. I did not look at that. But we did certainly look at that income statement. And again, Mr. Chair, the main point of concern here is that 4.9% cap rate is not supported by anything in the market. It's certainly not supported by evidence, and it's not supported by the brokers. So far too aggressive. Cap rate of 6.5 makes more sense for this property, and we feel very well supported at a value of $1,804,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Mr. Rockney, any questions for the applicant?
I do have one in regards to the cap. And in seeing the 6.25 cap for this property, looking at a previous one that you did say it would go to 6. That seemed to be a bit more inferior. Why would you suggest this one to be a 6.25 and not a 6 like another property that we reviewed?
Well, I mean, I suppose that to be clear, though, it's a 6.5 that we're applying today for this property. And each of these properties, Mr. Rockney, should be viewed on adhering on a site-specific basis. So I understand that the city has the task of valuing all of these properties, and they need to use a model. But on hearing, when the property is in subject, I think it's appropriate to do a site-specific analysis. So to answer your question very broadly, if you look at our cap rate table, and of course, we've provided a full cap rate study that's fulsome. It talks about the cost of money, lending rates, capitalization rates, relationship between all the different money markets, and how we arrived at our capitalization rates. And I have 2 sales. I haven't spoken about them yet, but we do indeed have 2 sales, 2 sales in the Inkster Industrial Park. And you can see that top one on Burroughs, that sold with a 6.73 cap, income in place. So that's a sale without any without us having to impute what the rents ought to be. That's a 30,000 square foot building, and it sold May of 2021 with 6.73. So nowhere near 4.9. 205 Hutchings, again, that's the original build was 1977 with an addition in 2005. That's a 27,000 square foot building. That sold with a 6.57 cap. So if we're talking about that lower cap on Fife, as I've mentioned a number of times now, I think that cap rate is a bit low that I've applied, but I'm trying to be fair. But ultimately, we agree with the brokers. These Class B industrial properties on the very, very low end might be a 6, but would go as high as 7.5. And that's indeed supported by these 2 sales that are roughly, if we round them, they're 6.5 and 6.75. So the cap rates that we've applied here, and particularly at this property at 6.5%, is well supported by those two sales.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Merritt, any questions for the applicant?
I don't think I have, except that I'm glad that Mr. Story, that you brought up some sales with cap rates in the close to the subject property in the industrial Inkster Park. So I thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
No questions at this time, but thank you very much for the update on the cap rate as well. Thank you.
And I have no further questions. Ms. Durochny, anything in summation?
Do not, thank you.
You do?
No, I do not, thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Story, anything in summation?
Yes, just very quickly, Mr. Chair, and we haven't spoken a lot about the cap rate study, but I will point out, of course, that I know you folks have heard this many times at this stage of the cycle, but we do take great pains to put together a rather fulsome capitalization rate study to lay bare all of our assumptions and any adjustments that we might make, and of course that's been provided to you. But I think that based on these actual sales in the Inkster Industrial Park, the values that we're supporting today are well in line and supported by these real sales. So I will leave it there, and I thank you.
Okay, that will conclude item number 7, 1330 Mountain. We will move to the next property on the docket, item number 9, 1555 Inkster Boulevard. This is an application for revision of the amount of the assessed value. There was a preliminary issue with this property. There is a non-co-op requested by the assessment department.
Mr. Chair, we're not disputing that for our purposes today. So we have no issue with the penalty in this case. It does appear that they were not responsive. So we are accepting the penalty in this specific instance.
Okay, for the record, the applicant is accepting the non-co-op request from the assessment department. Okay, Mr. Story, you may begin your presentation then.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, sir. So the property is 1555 Inkster Boulevard. That's roll number 14-06408160. There's a leasable area in this premise of 13,252 square feet. It's a single-story property that sits on just under 2.5 acres of land with an original age of 1969. So this property does indeed have a favorable land to building at 7.8 to 1. So as I mentioned, we would typically expect to see something in the range of 3 or 4 to 1. This is much larger, so we will make an adjustment to account for that excess land. We have to be equitable when we adjust for that being a negative. We should also adjust when it's a positive. So the property is currently being used by an importer in that warehouse space, and then a health training office space in the main. So we will request a discussion with the city to pursue an application for the exemption as a seminary of learning, as there is a firm who provides healthcare training. So that is something that we need to speak about. So ultimately, the rates that we've used here are $667 based on contract. So you can see Sweetland. This is on my page 12. That's the distributor. They are in at $626. And then that smaller space, which is just a touch under 1,700 square feet, is Prime Health Training Center, where again they teach courses for healthcare professionals. And that is a very fresh lease. That's 1 month starting. That's 1 month before the reference date. It's at $949. But again, I will caution it is office space effectively. It has sort of like a classroom space from the photos that I've reviewed. So that rent is a fair bit higher, but that's reflective of the quality of space and the current use. So ultimately, we've looked at those rents that I mentioned. These have come up a number of times. Most of these properties fall within a similar cohort. So these rents are indeed germane to our reference date. And as you can see, the average is 673 with a median of 688. So that supports the market rent at 667. So that is what we've applied. Vacancy is, we're applying 3.5%. I don't believe that will be in dispute. The shortfall is $4 per foot. Non-recoverables are agreed upon at 3%. So I did review this one again, and I think that now ultimately, if this had a inferior land to building, we would be looking again in that 6.5% to 7%. It is built in 1969. This is the former Carey's Garden Center. That's what it was for many years, from my recollection. But it's now been repositioned. I have to account for that favorable land to building. There are no plans to expand at this stage that I'm aware of. But ultimately, I think that 6.25 cap is a bit high for if we are trying to capture that excess land without applying a standalone excess land value. So I'm going to adjust that down to 6%, which gives me a new indicated market value, Mr. Chair, of $1,343,000. And again, that is not based on the quality of the building. It is indeed from 1969. So a fairly, that's an older building in the Inkster Industrial Park, to be certain. But that favorable land to building has to be captured somewhere. So I will do that with an adjustment by, liberally 50 to 100 basis points, frankly, on this building to account for that extra value. So we feel comfortable with our revised value of $1,343,000. And again, that's based on the NOI that we've supplied, which is based on contract, with an adjustment to the cap rate to account for that favorable land plan. So I will leave my presentation there, and I thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Was that a cap rate 6% you adjusted to, Mr. Story?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, Ms. Durockney, any questions for the applicant?
Possibly. In regards to the rent, and maybe you explained it and I didn't quite catch it, on page 12. Were these actual rents?
Okay, so on page 12, we've taken that. So if you look at the top indicator where it says the tenant leased area and the net market rent, those are the actual rents as recorded. And then to ensure that those were indeed at market, we went through Inkster Industrial for properties that were reasonably similar, though I will point out that all of these have an effective age that are superior to our subject. But they are rents that are germane to the reference date. They are all in the Inkster Industrial Park. And what we see, Mr. Rockney, are average rents from that data set of 673 and median rents of 688. Our contract rents are coming in at 667. So if we look, for example, at, well, let's see here. I mean, there are a number. You can look at 65 Muir, built in 1975. It's 11,950 feet, which is very similar to Sweetland Space at 11,500 feet, and they're getting 595. Ours is at 626. So when we have rents in place, we will often conduct a secondary check to ensure that they're not too far over or below market. And in this instance, the rents that are recorded appear to be well in line, or exactly in line with the market. So it's the actual rents in the top section, and then secondary review of the market to support that those contract rents are indeed at market, and we're satisfied that they are.
Thank you for that. I wasn't sure if it was owner occupied or the tenants were still in place, so that's perfect. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
No questions for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Mr. Story, you've decided to use the rents in place to determine your revenue on this property.
Yes, indeed, sir. Yeah.
And then you use.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead. No, go
and
ahead.
then you use some standard rates for vacancy, or standard-ish, if I may use that term. Expense ratios, 3%.
Yeah, those are all standard rates that have been accepted.
Yeah. Did you get any report from the applicant on the expenses?
In terms of calculating shortfall, no, I didn't. I accepted the $4 per foot. But in terms of their expenses, they're not well, they're not recorded here, so it's very difficult. But a standard allowance of $4 per foot is typically not in dispute. That's what we'd expect to see here. But no, I can see here that we have to work with this owner to ensure that the penalty is not applied and that the proper information is supplied. But no, we've simply deferred to those prescribed standard rates in this instance.
Right. So the owner did not provide you with a full income and expense report then?
No, we had the rent roll that came later, but in terms of the actual expenses, no, we didn't receive them. We'll have to work on them to get a better picture of that, to see if indeed the expenses are higher. I would suspect that they would be roughly in line just based on experience, but we will have a more granular review hopefully in the next cycle based on better submission. But we do have the rent, so that is certainly helpful.
Okay, I have no further questions. Okay. Ms. Durakany, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are defending the assessed value of $1,891,000 for the 2025 year based on the reference date of April 1, 2023. As Mr. Story explained, it contains one building, 2 premises, 1 story, an actual and effective year built in 1969 with a wall height of 29 feet, a leasable area of 13,252 square feet, and land to plan area of 7.8. There is a sale in 2015 on page 2 of $1,200,000. We'll turn your attention to page 15, in which, as Mr. Story explained, it is in the North Inkster industrial area. Exterior photos, page 15 through 16, and some aerial photos through page 18. We did provide 12 rent comparables on page 19. All are storage warehouses like the subject, with leasing starting in 2018 to 2022, an area range of 3,160 to 15,600 square feet, wall height of 12 to 26 feet, effective year built of 1960 to 1975, and a net rent of $6 to $13.92 per square foot. We provided some land comparables on page 20 and their aerial views following it. Page 22 has our income workup. The 2 premises total 13,252 square feet, with our blended rent of $8.30. Provide a potential rent of $110,052. We reduce that by a vacancy loss of 3.5% plus expenses at 3%, with the shortfall at $4 per square foot. This gives us the net operating income of $101,159. We've capitalized that at 5.35%, in which generates our capitalized value of $1,890,822. Rounded up to a final value of $1,891,000. Page 24 has our capitalization rates for this property. The cap rate meets our 20th percentile at 5.35. And so based on this evidence, we believe that the assessed value of $1,891,000 to be fair and equitable, and ask for it to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
I do. Mr. Rockney, this again is a modeled assessment, is that correct? Yeah, okay, and you selected the rents or the rental comps, is that correct?
I did, yes.
Okay, can we agree that all of the rental indicators, save for number 2, that are in the Inkster Industrial Park are just typically running, well, between $6 and $7 a foot? If we look at Inkster, Fife, well, Inkster and Fife are the 2. So it looks like they're running from $6 to $7.14, correct?
There is the Fife at $13.92, that second one.
Okay, and that would, I was going to ask you about that. That would appear to be an outlier, would it not? That seems very, very high. Are you sure that's not a gross rent?
I'm not certain. I don't believe it would be a gross rent.
Okay, and can we agree that as the, sorry, why do you believe it's not a gross rent? Sort of interest?
Typically our comps are net rent.
Okay, and can we agree that as the principle of economies of scale would dictate that as the leased area increases, the bigger the leased premise, typically the lease rate per foot would go down? Is that a fair comment? So larger spaces rent for less on a per square foot. Okay, and the range of comps that you've used here run from 3,000 feet to 15,000. So that's a very broad range, is it not?
I was trying to get the individual leasable areas there.
Okay. Okay. And then again, with that cap rate, once again, that would be well outside of what the brokers are suggesting, correct? Okay. I think that's that question a number of times, so I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Rockney.
Mr. Merritt, any questions for the assessor?
I have none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Marks, any questions?
And none for me, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Why did you, Mr. Rockney, why did you provide those land comparables on page 20?
Typically anything that's above 4.55 land to plan area, were to provide vacant land comparables. There they are, page 20.
Okay, so it wouldn't be considered excess land though, correct? Surplus.
Correct.
When do you do that?
It's a good question. That's a good question. I think it was too quick on the ball there with the land to plan area.
You have an answer for it, or?
No, you can disregard those.
Just disregard the land comparables. Okay. I don't believe I have any further questions. I do not have any further questions. Anything in summation, Mr. Story?
Yeah, just very quickly, Mr. Chair. We believe that the positions that we put forward here today are well supported. They're well researched, and we do again we've provided you with real sales in the Inkster Industrial Park, and they are just very broadly ranging from 6.5, call it, to 6.75, and our positions on these properties and subject have reflected that research. So we would respectfully submit that that our workups that are not model derived but rather done by human analysis are more appropriate, and would ask that they be given weighted consideration. And I thank you.
Ms. Rockney, anything in summation?
I do not think you.
Okay, that will conclude item number 9, 1555 Inkster. And did you receive the class and liability withdrawal signature, Mr. Mohan, for the item number 2 property?
Yes, Mr. Chair, but there was a misunderstanding by my part, but I'm sure Mr. Story will send it home.
I can update it right now. I've just been, I couldn't do it while we were discussing the
Oh, yeah.
properties, but I'll do it right now. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, is that just going to be a short time there to get that resolved, or?
Oh, yes, I can do it as soon as would you like me to do it now, or would you like me to do it?
If you wouldn't mind, yeah, so
Yeah,
I
sure.
can get it on the record that it was done
Okay, yeah.
during the meeting.
Okay. Mr. Chair, would you mind if we took a quick 5 minutes so I could complete this? I just need to change my screens around and it's a little
Yes,
bit.
we can take a 5-minute break. Yep,
Oh,
we
thank
can
you,
do
sir.
that.
Appreciate it.
Okay, we are back in order. So the withdrawal of the class and liability revision request for item number 585 Jarvis has been, the signature for the withdrawal has been received. Therefore, we have heard all of the items on the docket this morning, and this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations.
Welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
You too.